The Macedonia Fire Department was formed in 1921 when a group of 12 residents formed a volunteer firemen's association and voted George Johnston as fire chief. The group organized fundraisers to help them purchase their first piece of fire equipment, a 40-gallon soda acid tank on a high-wheel buggy. The department had officially opened its doors to helping their 581 neighbors, but was without a home. Fred Jenkins, one of the 12 that formed the group, offered to keep the extinguisher in his barn next to his coal stove. The heat from the stove was needed to keep the extinguisher from freezing during the winter. In 1931, the village passed an $18,000 bond issue to purchase property on the corner of North Bedford Road, then known as North Road, and State Route 82. The bond issue also allowed them to purchase a brand new 1931 Seagraves pumper for $5,500. From 31 to 32, Floyd V. McRitchie served as fire chief and George Johnston was assistant chief. The following year, 1933 to 34, George Johnston served as chief and Lynn Jenkins as assistant chief. And from 1935 to 1949, the positions of fire chief and assistant fire chief rotated between George Johnston and Art Collins. Records indicate that in 1935, there were 7 reported fire calls, 4 grass fires, 3 building fires, 2 mutual aid calls to Sagamore Hills, and 1 mutual aid call to Northfield. The fire loss that year was $400, and the total paid out to the firefighters was $60.25. Sometime during the late 30s, members from the department built a water tank truck to help them carry water to fire calls. The department's call volume continued to grow through the 40s, and on average, they responded to 35 calls per year. The type of calls they were responding to had also grown and consisted of grass fires, building fires, trailer fires, electrical downed wires, mutual aid calls, vehicle accidents, false fire alarms, and emergency medical calls. As they continued through the 50s, the number of calls for the department fluctuated, from as low as 21 to as high as 37. And in 1951, there were 24 calls. 12 were building fires, 3 mutual aid calls, 4 false alarm fires, 2 emergency medical calls, and 3 DOAs. That year, the department purchased their first water tank truck from the Standard Oil Company. It was a used 1940 1,200-gallon white tank truck that the department had painted red before they put it in service. In 1959, the department moved into a new 3-bay garage-type building at 9683 Valley View Road. The plan was to eventually add office space for the fire department and also add space for the police and dispatch sometime in the future. From 1930 to 1960, Macedonia's population exploded from only 734 to 6,374 residents. In 1963, the village passed legislation that the positions of fire chief and assistant fire chief were to be appointed by the mayor. The first appointed chiefs were Art Collins to chief and Ralph Grimminger to assistant chief. With the population and demand growing, the department was able to purchase much needed equipment in the 60s, including a Peter Persh 500-gallon engine, an International Harvester Company Scout, and an 1,800-gallon tank truck with a front-mounted water pump from Sutphin Fire Equipment Company.
The Scout was really a great piece of equipment because normally you get grass fires, you've got to walk them because you haven't got a truck that can get into the field to take care of the fires. So when they purchased the Scout, now we were able to get into the fields and that and fight the fires. And that was a big help. Plus, we had tankers that we could use. We had 2 tankers at that time, and one was, I believe, a 1947 Ford tanker. And some of the older gentlemen on the department says it almost caused a lot of divorces because the men spent so much time. They built it from the frame up. And this was a neat little truck for hauling water. Plus we had a larger Ford tanker that we used, and it helped out quite a bit, especially on the ability to haul that amount of water to a fire, and some of the places had no hydrants. So you counted on these pieces of equipment to give you the water that you needed. And it's surprising the amount of water that an engine can go through very quickly.
We just lived down in the corner, and Harry Markwith lived in a house next to us. I was out in the yard working, and he came over and he says, "You work in the afternoons?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "They're hunting for daytime men on a fire department." And that was, I never ever thought about it being a fireman. He said, "Go up and talk to the chief." Well, Art was up in Canada, and Ralph was up here, and I came up and I told Ralph I'd like to go in the fire department. He says to me, I'll never forget, he says, "You know, to be a fireman, you gotta want to be a fireman." And I told Ralph, "You know, you guys will know if I'm not. Throw me off, I don't care." Well, 24 years later, I got off.
We used to chase the fire trucks around here in Macedonia. It was sort of interesting because whenever there was a fire, of course, the siren would go off. And when the siren would go, we knew there was a fire. You could go to pick up your phone. You could ask the operator where the fire was, and she would tell you. And if it was up on the north end of Macedonia, where I primarily did live up there, we'd get on our bikes and chase down Bedford Road or wherever, Ledge Road, to go see where the fires were. Well, most of the time when I was on way of grass fires, there were steam engines, trains on the track, and they would be forever throwing out ashes off, and that would catch the grass on fire along the tracks. Particularly on what we call the Chrysler spur, when the engines would go up the hill going over the Chrysler plant, it seemed we had more grass fires down that area. Some of the properties along the railroad tracks, particularly in our business, we had greenhouses on Ledge Road, we had vacant fields there. We would turn those fields over to local farmers to plant corn in there, so it would always be green, because we were right on the railroad tracks to prevent having a fire start in the grass and come up to our buildings. A lot of these fires, it seemed, always happened at night, and it was pretty tough when you'd find a fire and it started, well, on Bellevue Road, say right here near where the City Hall is, and it was going all the way down to, say, Highland Road in various different spots. You're going at night and you're going through people's property that you'd never been before, and you were carrying an Indian water pump on your back to put it out, or carrying a broom, and of course it's dark. You just followed the fire, and many a time you stumbled in rabbit holes and so forth and fell and got back up again and started all over again. But that was part of it. And there was many a times we'd think that the fire was out, and would get a call that the fire started, or another train came through and started again. There was many nights that I remember that we had maybe 4 or 5 calls just because of that.
In the early 70s, the city added office space to the fire station, 2 additional truck bays with higher entrance doors, and office space that would allow the police department and dispatch center to move into the south side of the building. With the retirement of Chief Art Collins in 1973, the mayor appointed Carl Stewart as fire chief, and when Ralph Grimminger retired a short time later, the mayor appointed Joe Chismar to the position of assistant fire chief. Macedonia had never had full-time firefighters staffing the station until 1979, when Henry "Skip" Gerstenberger and Daniel Gagliardi were hired as the department's first full-time firefighters. They were also the first firefighters hired using the civil service testing process. The 80s brought a drastic change to the type of calls the department was responding to. In 1982, it was recorded that out of 313 calls that year, 246 of them were rescue squad calls. 22 were structure fires, 3 commercial fires, 21 vehicle fires, 7 grass fires, 1 gas pump fire, 1 downed electrical wire, 1 gas leak, 8 trash fires, 2 bomb threats, and 1 public service request. On February 26, 1985, smoke and flames consumed the building the fire department once called home in the 30s and 40s. The structure was severely damaged by the fire and eventually was torn down. In 1989, Chief Carl Stewart retired and Henry "Skip" Gerstenberger was appointed fire chief through the civil service testing process. Later that year, Chief Gerstenberger appointed Frank Posar as assistant fire chief.
Joined in 1970. My wife and I were married in 69. We moved here in 70, June of 70. And later in June, we both had our vacations, and she was not happy with me being on Independence Fire Department. And I was out in the yard, and she came and called to me, and she said there was, this fire siren had been going for about 20 minutes, and there was smoke coming up from the center of town. Maybe I should go and help out. And I came down, and it was a barn fire across from the grade school here on Valley View. And I introduced myself to Chief Stewart, or he was a captain at that time. It was only he and Dan McLeod, one of the other firemen. So I helped out and came back to the station to help him repack the hose and so forth. And he came out of the office with an application in his hand, and he handed it to me, and I said, I don't think this will fly. My wife's not going to agree to this at all. And he said, well, just take it home and see what happens. So I took it home, and she said, go ahead. If that's what you want, go ahead and do it. And I did, and I worked until 79 as a volunteer, and became full-time. Dan Gagliardi and I became full-time in February of 79. And I was here, I believe, until like 94.
As the department entered the 90s, the total number of calls continued to increase. In 1990, the total number of calls was 501. The most interesting increase came from the type of calls they responded to. Out of the 501 calls, 342 were for rescue squad, making up 68% of the call volume. In 1994, Chief Henry Gerstenberger resigned and Daniel Gagliardi was appointed acting fire chief until a new chief was appointed. In 1995, Timothy Black was appointed fire chief, and the rank of assistant fire chief was temporarily removed. Daniel Gagliardi was appointed to captain. As the city continued to grow, the department started planning for the future, and in the early 90s, started working on the construction of a new safety center. The building would become reality in 1996 as they began construction on a 3-story city center that today currently houses our city government offices, police, and fire departments. In 1996, the city added a full-time second shift, and later that year entered into a contract with the Village of Boston Heights to co-respond and assist in handling their EMS and fire calls. In August of 1997, the department promoted 2 members to lieutenant, Chip Davis and Paul Selinski. The two of them, along with Captain Daniel Gagliardi, led the start of the first full-time paid 24-hour coverage for the city of Macedonia. The shifts were titled A, B, and C, and members would work 24 hours on and 48 off.
The call volume was going up, and it was getting out of reach for the volunteers to be able to handle that. So adding the second shift and then 97, 98 going around the clock where we always had people. The time of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning out of bed and driving to the fire station with your red light on and then leaving in the rescue squad or the fire truck and going to the scene really doubles your time. Because you have to get up, you have to get dressed, you have to get out of your house, you have to drive to the station in your personal vehicle, and then you have to get in the truck and drive. Well, we eliminated that, where now you would get up and get right into the fire truck and pull straight out. So we were really cutting the time in half of what we were able to do. And just service levels, bringing that service level up to where we had a 4-minute response time anywhere in the city. People always ask me what was a good response time, and I would always say, hold your breath. When you want to breathe, let me know. Well, that's when we should be there if somebody's not breathing. And same with fire. What's a good response time for fire? Well, set your pants on fire and let me know when you want me to put them out. You want it as quick as possible, and that's what was changing in the city the most, was the population and just the service levels, raising those service levels up. And that's what we were able to accomplish in the 90s, and go from simply a 8-hour-a-day full-time and then volunteers at night, all the way up to around-the-clock full-time employees, with supplement of the part-timers on shift. There was no difference between full-time and part-time with me. You know, if you're a firefighter, when you show up to their door and they tell you their problem, they're not going, are you full-time? Are you part-time? Do you do something? They don't care. They want their problem solved. They're at their worst moment. So I tried never to have any divider between full and part-time. The full-timers were here full-time and the part-timers were filling in. So we've done nothing but hire more part-timers to fill in. I think that they're a great cost savings for the residents, but only to supplement the full-time members that are here. So I think when I left in 19, and I think it is here today, I think that our employees or firefighters here are extremely dedicated to the public, what they do. They're extremely well trained. Thank God the city has the proper equipment for them to use. So it comes down to getting good people, in my book, getting the right people with the right ethics, that know how to treat people, and then getting them trained properly through the channels, and then giving them good equipment, and then basically staying out of their way, because they're going to go out and they're going to do their job. And you really don't have to, if you've done all 3 of those and they have good equipment and they have the good training and you have good people, you stay out of their way and you let them perform their job, and they will make you look good all the time.
In 1999, the city entered into an agreement with Northfield Village to help cover EMS and fire calls. This assistance continued until April of 2000. As the department entered the new millennium, the number of calls more than doubled, from 501 calls in 1990 to 1,237 calls in 2000. Of those calls, more than half were for rescue squad. From 2000 to 2010, Macedonia's population continued to rise, and so did the number of rescue squad calls. In 2010, out of 1,515 total calls, 1,024, or 72%, were for EMS. On October 1st, 2013, the Village of Boston Heights decided to end the 16-year EMS and fire coverage contract with Macedonia. Interestingly, even with their departure, the number of calls the department responded to remained the same. On September 14, 2016, the department began providing EMS and fire services for Northfield Center and Sagamore Hills Townships under a 5-year contract. The service agreement expanded the department's coverage area from 9.5 square miles to approximately 26 square miles, and increased the population they covered from 11,927 to approximately 26,000 residents. The department went from delivering services from 1 fire station to 3 fire stations. The contract allowed for an increase of 9 additional full-time firefighters and as many as 6 additional part-time members. During the first year of the contract, call volume nearly doubled from 1,750 to 3,450. In 2019, after 36 years with the fire department, Chief Timothy Black retired, and Brian Ripley was appointed fire chief. One of Chief Ripley's first goals was to seek mayor and council approval to allow him to bring back the position of assistant fire chief. And on January 3rd, 2020, Paul Solinsky was promoted to assistant fire chief.
When I started, we were only running a basic EMS unit, no paramedics. We didn't start running paramedics until 1989. A couple of us had gone to medic school prior to that, but in 1989 they hired someone who was a paramedic and who could be here during the day as a full-timer, and that started the whole paramedic program. We did not initially, per se, guarantee a medic on every run. Guys were coming out of school and to a certain extent being thrown to the wolves. Today, there's an extensive training program. Not only is paramedic training improved, but we have a training program for any new employee where they have to go through, not the hoops, but they have to demonstrate their skills, that they're out there working on residents and represent us the way we want to be represented and treat the patients the right way. And it works out very well. We have very high quality staff. Some of the biggest changes that have occurred in my tenure here, in 1996, hiring additional full-time staff, going around the clock in late 1997. And actually, when I think about it, actually starting paramedics in 1989, huge, has saved many, many lives. When we took over the townships and started providing service to them was huge. I believe in regionalization. Small city government's not going to be able to continue. And it's a way of spreading those resources over a greater area and getting more out of them. Call volume has just been, my first year here, I believe we had, I kind of waver. Sometimes I think it was 185, sometimes I think it was 235. But I will tell you, in June of 2021, we ran 406 for 1 month. So that's been a huge change, huge, huge, huge. When I think back, Carl Stewart, Ellis Golden, Joe Chismar, and Jim Cross, they're still having an impact on our fire department today. And it's something that if I was in their shoes, I would be very proud of. And it's because of what they instilled in us when we were young. It's been able to be carried on. And there's so many people that have molded the Macedonia Fire Department what it is today that they are too many to name. They all had their little piece, and it's something I'm very proud of.
Recently, Northfield Center and Sagamore Hills Townships have renewed their agreement with the City of Macedonia by signing a 15-year contract. The current staffing of the department is 28 full-time and 13 part-time firefighter paramedics. The fleet of vehicles consists of 7 fully stocked ACLS ambulances, 4 engines, 1 mid-mount aerial tower, 1 all-terrain 4-wheel drive rescue vehicle, 2 inflatable rescue boats, 2 pickup trucks, and 4 staff vehicles. The number of calls responded to in 2020 were 3,830, and the department is on pace to break 4,000 runs in 2021.